and then we post it back on the Bell McCoy University, so you guys can always go back and look at it. And I think some people were asking about the slide deck, so we're going to figure out a way to try to get that up there as well. And there's all sorts of other like Lutron trainings on there as well. So if you guys want to kind of poke around, you can do that. So, but anyways, other than that, we'll let Joel kind of get started. He can share the screen.
Okay, I will turn myself off. Okay, so I hit share here and we're good to go.
Yep.
Okay.
The bottom.
All right, can you see it? Do you see my residential shades triathlon?
No. When you're on the bottom, it says share screen with the arrow.
Yeah, I did, and the screen came up. Mine has the ring around it, the blue ring around it, the blue square, but you don't see it. Yeah. Oh, maybe. Oh, I didn't click the share button. Now you see it.
Now we go. There you go. You're off to the right.
Okay. Sorry. All right. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. We're going to talk about triathlon, and like what James said, we really want to get into the MyProjects stuff at the end. But I think I want to tee it all up with what the product is. And Catherine talked to you yesterday, if you were in with her, and she kind of did a little bit of an overview of it and talked about strategies of selling. I want to really give you the hands-on kind of what the nuts and bolts are. So my name is Joel Hitchman. I've been at Lutron 35 years. I have a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. So I'm a residential senior systems engineer. So like James said, I do a bulk of the shade training for Lutron in the United States and Canada. So triathlon consists of two different categories: an insulating honeycomb shade and a roller shade. So we'll talk about each of those, and we're not going to really get into the fabrics of it so much because Catherine talked a bit about that yesterday. But I just want to kind of give you, the overview of what they are. So as far as power goes, and people think about triathlon shade as being a battery-powered solution, right? And it is a battery-powered solution, just like this drill. This cordless drill is a battery-powered solution. The other way you could operate a drill is with a cord, right? And that plugs in. That's permanent power, 120 volts. And we usually call that a corded drill, but in the shade world, calling something corded is a little bit misleading because corded can mean a lot of things. It's the pull cord that you would use on a manual shade. So using the word corded for a manual for a motorized shade or an automated shade may be misleading. So I refer to it more as a tethered power. So we have battery power and tethered power, and how it relates to these drills is if I have a drill that's battery powered and I want to then plug it in, change the power source to plug it in, I can't do that, right? I have to either buy a battery drill or a tethered power corded drill. So same thing with a battery powered shade from Lutron Triathlon shade. If you order it as battery powered, it's going to remain battery powered. If you order as a corded, there's a corded option or a tethered option for it to tether it to 12-volt supply without batteries. You can do that, but I can't go back and forth. So it's one or the other. So it's very much like a drill, right? In terms of how the power is provided and how you have to get that power from that point forward. So you're committed to that power source. But most of the time it is battery powered. There is an individual plug-in power supply if you're going with a tethered shade or a 10 output power panel. And the reason you might choose one of the tethered power over battery power is the walls are open and I can run wire and I never have to deal with changing batteries. Or it's a high shade, I can't get to it to change batteries very easily. It would take scaffolding to change the batteries. That's not a great candidate for a battery operated shade if you need a scaffolding. Now, it could be as long as 5 or 6 years until you replace the batteries. But even then, getting a scaffold out to change the batteries after 5 years is still a major hassle. So those are the reasons you might use a plug-in or a tethered power supply. There's also manual options that aesthetically match all the powered options that are available as well. Okay, so battery-wise, when we recommend batteries, it's for the most part, everything is a D-cell battery. There are a couple of smaller insulating honeycomb shades that are AA, but most most shades that you're going to run into are going to be using a D-cell battery. They're alkaline, no disposable batteries. I mean, no rechargeable batteries, always disposable, because they have a much better shelf life and much better life in the system between charges. Obviously, you throw these away after you're done, but you can get 5-6 years out of it. So the two recommended brands that we like to talk about are Rayovac and Duracell, because they do perform the best. Energizer is inconsistent, and we don't get good results out of them. Some are good, some are not so good. So Rayovac and Duracell are the brands of choice, and you want to use alkaline batteries. So for best battery life, don't mix old and new batteries. Don't mix battery types, meaning alkaline and carbon zinc. Always the same batteries, always from the same package. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some strategies on batteries too, to extend the life or testing of batteries before you put them in. Don't assume that every battery that you put in from the brand new package is fully charged. It happens sometimes where they're not, and you don't want to use that battery. It's not worth the $1 to use that battery if it's subpar. So I'll talk about that, but they're generally going to use alkaline batteries in the D-cell format. AA, when there's AA battery required, which is in an insulating honeycomb shade, on the smaller sizes, you'll use a lithium battery. And that battery happens to be Energizer. For lithium, you want to use Energizer. And it's very hard to find any AA battery that is not Energizer. So most AA batteries that you find that are lithium are going to be Energizer anyway. So that's the battery for that. But it's Energizer for AA, Rayovac, and Duracell for D-cell. And again, rechargeable batteries aren't a good option. They do work, obviously, but they have a very fast self-discharge rate. So they'll discharge very fast, even when they're not being used. And then you'll be recharging them quite a bit. And it's a logistics problem all around. So just use the disposable alkalines or lithiums in the case of AA. So Catherine talked about this yesterday, but shades will move at the same speed. Batteries decay over time. So the batteries I put in today are going to have less power tomorrow than they did today, right? And that's going to continue until they ultimately die. But through that whole time, it doesn't matter, because if I have two shades that have various ages of batteries in them, they will both run at the same speed, regardless of how much power is in that battery at that particular time. To a certain point, when it gets to a point when the battery is about to expire, the shade will slow down to a slower speed. That'll be the indicator that the batteries are low, or you'll see an LED flash on the unit indicating that batteries are about to expire. So those are some of your key indicators. We don't ship batteries with the product, simply because of weight and the ability to ship air with lithium batteries and alkaline batteries. So batteries are sourced locally, and the best place to get them is, like a warehouse club. People buy them in warehouse clubs a lot. That's probably you get them around $1 a piece at places like that. So it's not too bad. So we'll talk about MyProjects later, but MyProjects will tell you how many batteries you need for each shade. So based on width and size of the shade, the number of batteries will vary. That will be a key item that will be shared with you at the end of the specification of the product. But in general, for a 14.5 to 22 inch honeycomb shade, you're going to use AA batteries. They're in an external battery pack, like that thing right there, that little thing on the back. Most of the time they're in the headrail, but when they're below 22 inches, there's a little battery pack that stacks on the back. Those are AA. And then when it's up to 27 inches, you'll still be AA lithium, but they'll be inside the headrail. That battery pack won't be on the back. There's simply not enough room in the headrail for batteries, the lifting spools, and the drive to fit it all in there. So we put them on the back. But once you get above 22, then you can put them inside the headrail. When you get above 27 inches, then it goes to D-cell. So it's a very small segment of what we sell uses AA batteries in the first place. So once you get above 27, you're going to use D-cell alkaline batteries. For roller shades, everything is a D-cell. The smallest shade we do is 19.5. Everything 19.5 and above is going to use D-cell alkaline batteries. So changing the batteries is simple. Once I hang the shade up on the upper left-hand corner, I'm showing this, the insulating honeycomb shade. The bracket allows you to tilt it down. You're not taking it out of the bracket. It tilts down, it supports itself. You pull the batteries out, you flip it back up. For a roller shade, you pull down on the fascia or pull down on the battery compartment if there is no fascia there. And you would expose the batteries, replace the batteries, and then close the thing back up. None of it comes out of the brackets to change the batteries. So if you choose not to use batteries and you want to use a permanent power source, they operate on 12 volts. All of the others, all other Lutron shades, Savoya QS wireless, are 35 volts. So there's a difference. There are different power supplies, but all the Triathlon use a 12-volt power supply if you're going to use a tethered power supply and not use batteries. So I plug one of these, can power one shade. I plug it in. It has a 1-foot lead on it, and there's a 15-foot cord in the shade. If I need to make it longer, I can. I have to be aware of these rules. I need to run 16 gauge, 18 gauge, or 20 gauge, those distances, 200 feet, 125 feet, or 75 feet for those different gauges. If I want to do more than one, I can power 10 shades off of this panel. That's a little over roughly 9 by 13 inches. That would be somewhere remotely, and I'd run wire to it. The wire run distances are the same as the plug-in power supply. 18 gauges, 16 gauges, 200 feet, 18 gauges, 125, and 20 gauges, 75. So those are your power supplies. From a system perspective, if this thing, typically you might see things get integrated into a system, right? So Triathlon QS battery powered is totally wire free, has no wires whatsoever because there's batteries, and the communication is all wireless. So it's wireless communication. So there's nothing, it's like installing a manual shade, really, because there's nothing to connect to it. Just put batteries in it, and it talks to all of our systems: Caseta, Radio-Rod2, Rod2 Select, Radio-Rod2, and Homeworks. And you have varying different number of components you can put in those systems. So the Homework system can get huge with just wireless product. 1,500 wireless devices can be on there. Triathlon QS with tethered power is going to have 2 conductors going to it. No batteries, because you're giving it a permanent power source. But the RF receiver is integrated, so the communication is wireless, but the power source is tethered, or it has a 2-conductor wire connected to it. But the same rules apply as far as integration with other Lutron systems. So if I do have a shade that has a power supply that is going to be tethered, there is going to be a 15-foot wire or tether in that shade that is going to be tucked into the headrail. I'll use that to run that to the power supply. Again, if I need to lengthen it, I can lengthen it. If I need to shorten it, I can shorten it. But it's 15 feet. It's always in the left-hand side. So that's looking at the top of a headrail of a insulating honeycomb shade. On a roller shade, the tethered bundle is also on the left-hand side. It's 15 foot also. It's on the left-hand side for a regular roll. That means the fabric is coming off the back of the tube closest to the glass. If it's a reverse roll, the tether or the wire bundle is on the right-hand side. Reverse roll is the fabric falling off of the tube on the room side. Okay. So going in a little bit more deep dive on honeycomb shades, that's your headrail with the fabric all kind of collected at the top. So there's a battery tray in there, or if there's a cable, there will be a cable in there. But generally, it's going to be batteries, and you're going to be putting your batteries in there once you install it, right? Your drive is in the middle there, and then there's a spool there and a spool there that allow you that has string in that unspool the string to let the fabric down or pull it back up. It just gathers at the top underneath the headrail. That's a look at the battery pack that would be on the back if you have a very narrow insulating honeycomb shade that requires AA batteries. Okay, it's less than 22 inches. Another thing to be aware of when you're sizing this out is that there's a thing we refer to as stack, right? So that the height of the system A varies based on how tall the shade is, because there's more fabric that is collected here. That collection of fabric is when it's all stacked up. So if the shade is really tall, that stack will be a little bit taller. So that's the overall height of the shade when it's all the way completely retracted. And there's a chart, insulating honeycomb stack chart, that you can find online on our website. And it's a good idea maybe to have that available to you, because you might want to know how much of that head rail and the stack is going to be sticking into their window when you go to specify it. But inside mount's the most common. It takes about 2.5 inches of depth. The whole system is about 2.5 inches of deep. But when you can install it in a jam that is 1 inch deep. It will stick out. That red line represents the edge of the jam. So this stuff to the right would be sticking out of the jam. But you need at least 1 inch there to put the screws in to get good bite into your header. So 2.5 would fully recess it. 1 inch would give you about 1.5 inches of it sticking out, right? But inside mount, it would be still be between the jams. It wouldn't be wider than jams as you see there. So my whole header rail sticks in between. As far as when you do an inside mount, you measure the window width, and we'll talk about measuring in a bit, but you measure the window width, and then you provide us that width that you measure, and we'll take an 1/8 inch deduction off of that per side, so that the shade is a little bit smaller in the event of a little mismeasurement. And there's some tolerances in when we build it to account for this thing to fit into that space. If it's an outside mount where it's not going to be in between two jams, then we don't take any deduction at all. You give us the dimension, that's what we build it to. On the side, that deduction results in a little bit of a gap. We need a little bit of space between the fabric and the jam so there's no interference. So there's an 1/8 inch of space there. That's pretty tight. That gives a pretty good light seal. I mean, obviously light does bleed through there, but it does do a pretty good job of blocking light. There is, if you're attaching it to a door, you can stabilize it by adding a cable guided option. So there's a cable, can't really see them on the picture very well, but there's a cable here. It's tied in at the bottom of the door here. There's a piece of hardware that ties the cable into the door at the bottom. And the honeycomb shade lives on that cable, and it keeps it stable. So when the door opens up, it doesn't swing all over the place. That's another $125 to add to it, but it does a good job of stabilizing that on the door. It's not meant for an angled system, so you can't put it in a skylight. This has to be a vertical solution. It can't go horizontal. It can't go at an angle. It has to go completely vertical. It's just to stabilize it. There are CAD drawings for more detailed information. The text on here is kind of small, but I just want to give you an idea of what there is available on our website if you want very specific information. So if you're putting it up in a pocket, like this guy is here, or you need to shim it out, you can kind of see what you got to do there, right? So that gives you those details. One thing we don't do, it's either a wall mount or a ceiling mount. The bracket can be mounted to the ceiling or mounted to the wall. If you don't have in this case, this window doesn't have a surface, a horizontal or a vertical surface to mount it to, the traditional, so you have to mount it to the jam. Our bracket doesn't accommodate that. What this is showing is this is a field modification to the bracket where the installer screwed an L bracket onto our bracket, and then he was able to mount it to the jam. So that's one way you could do that. So people modify some things from time to time to make it fit their application. That's not that uncommon. So roller shade wise, the maximum, or looking at the sizes, there's two main categories of automated shades: triathlon and triathlon wire. Triathlon has a maximum width of 108 inches, a minimum width of 19.5, has a minimum height of 12 and a maximum height of 120. So 108 by 120 is the maximum size you can do. Triathlon wider uses some other different hardware and different construction to allow us to go to a wider width and a taller height. So it can go to 144 wide by 144 tall, so 12 by 12. It doesn't get quite as small. It's still, its minimum size is 20.5 inches versus 19.5, but it gets you 12 by 12, okay? So I'll talk about the variation in aesthetics between the two. And then there are cordless manual versions as well. And they go to 63 by 72. So if you wanted a manual option in a space where a motorized shade wasn't necessary, and it was a way to cover that window with and keep the same look throughout, the cordless manual is available to do that. So Triathlon wider, typically it's going to get used in a shade that's 9 feet or wider, right? It can go 12 feet wide, and the maximum roll up, this guy right here looking at it from the side or looking at it from the front, that roll up when that shade rolls all the way up is going to be no greater than 3 inches. So the question is, if I had a shade that was narrower than 8 feet, I could go to the standard Triathlon. It's a little less expensive than the wider version. And I can do it up to 8 feet wide very easily. But why would I do an 8-foot wide shade or something that's less than 8 foot wide on a wider platform? The reason I would do that is because I want to match the aesthetic of the wider shades throughout the space. They look a little bit different. I'll talk about that in a second, but so that's why you might go to a shade that is on the wider chassis or platform, although it doesn't really need it. And the reason that some of the magic of getting wider is that we use a stiffer tube, when we a bigger diameter tube and a thicker wall. And when we get to the 12-foot range, or 10 to 11 to 12-foot range, we start to use a carbon fiber tube to make it super rigid and reduce the deflection in the tube. The real thing we're trying to fight here is the tube deflecting or sagging. And when the tube sags, it causes ripples in the fabric. So we want to minimize as much of that as possible. And that's why you go to a carbon fiber tube when you get to 12 inches wide or 12 feet wide, or getting close to 12 feet wide. So aesthetically, if you look at the system without fascia, there's Triathlon and Triathlon wider. So Triathlon has a plastic tube up here. Generally, people don't leave this exposed because it looks okay, but it's not great. So generally that's used when people are going to use their own top treatment. A Triathlon wider has an aluminum, it's concave, almost looks like crown molding in a way. And that's specified a lot without any top treatment over top of it. That can stand alone just as is. So that's the both without fascia. Then there's also fabric wrap fascia and architectural fascia. Fabric wrap fascia is what the name implies. It's a piece of fascia that's a plastic piece of fascia that is covered with fabric. In Triathlon and Triathlon wider, they look the same. They have the same elevation, but the wider, the fascia on the wider is about 1 inch deeper. It extends into the room by 1 inch. So if this were 4 inches here, your Triathlon wider would be 5 inches. Same thing is true with architectural fascia. Architectural fascia is just a squared off fascia that is made of aluminum just for a different aesthetic look. But same rule, it's a little bit deeper, right? And it's available in white, black, bronze, and silver. So that's what the battery powered aesthetics look like. Tethered power, if you're going to hardwire it to a 12-volt supply, is the top row is without fascia. And it looks, if you're familiar at all with Roller 64, it doesn't look that much different than our Savoya QS Roller 64 platform, but it's that can stand alone pretty well. There's the end caps are clean, and if they want an exposed roller, a minimalist look, that does stand alone pretty well. Same thing with Triathlon wider without fascia. That has tethered power. It stands alone just like the one with batteries in it. It looks the same actually. If it's fascia, if it's tethered power, but it's fascia and it's fabric wrapped, what I'm showing here is the fascia is not actually on. That's what the chassis looks like before I would snap the fascia on. So the fascia gets snapped on. It looks just like the image I showed you before with the fascia on the battery powered. Looks it's identical. So that's what it looks like without the fascia on. This is what the Triathlon wider looks without fascia on, but then there'd be fascia over top of that as well. And then there's architectural, same story with the fabric as fabric wrapped. It looks the same. It's just architectural metal fascia that snaps on versus the fabric wrapped. And this is what it looks like underneath for that scenario in wider. Okay, so those are the aesthetics. That's how things look, how they look relative to each other. So looking at them from a cross section, giving you a little bit more details on what the expected exposure into the room is. A triathlon without fascia, a standard triathlon without. These are not triathlon wide. It's just standard triathlon. It's 3 inches by about 5 inches. If it's battery powered. If it's tethered power, it's very minimal. It's 3 inches by 2.5 inches. And if it's a cordless manual, it's 3 inches by 2.5 inches. Cordless manual and tethered power have the same basic aesthetic look. If it has fascia, it's about 5 by 3.5, about 5 by 3.5 in both cases. So fabric wrapped and architectural in those two varieties. Triathlon wider with no fascia is a little bit bigger from a cross section perspective. It's about 4 by 5. Okay, and that 4 inches varies, and 4 and 5 inches will vary a little bit because it includes your roll up diameter, this diameter of the fabric rolling up. If there is less fabric on the tube, or the shade is not very tall, there'll be less fabric gathered around the tube when it's rolled up, so the diameter will be as small.
Yeah.
So, and then fascia for fabric wrapped, for fascia option on wider with fabric wrap, it's a 5 by 4.5. For architectural, it's 5 by 4.5. So it's a little bit deeper, as I was explaining a little bit earlier, about an inch deeper. So from 3.5 to 4.5 roughly, in terms of depth change on a wider system versus a non-wider standard triathlon. As far as mounting goes, for the most part, you're going to be putting up a rail, not discrete brackets on each end. A mounting rail is going to go up first, right? And then that's going to get screwed into either the wall or the ceiling, depending on what surface you're mounting to. Again, you need the minimum jam depth you need to mount this rail is 1 inch. So I'm going to take you to the picture. This picture here tells the story a little bit better. So that's my rail, and then my shade would then clip into that rail, right? And I need this depth has to be at least 1 inch for me to get a screw into that and hit something that will hold it up. So generally it's going to be fully recessed, but you need at least 1 inch of depth to be able to screw it to the ceiling. So it's a super simple installation. That literally takes, if you have it all unpacked and you have everything out, you can be done in minutes really. So if it's a tethered power supply, it uses a different bracket system. It doesn't use that rail. It uses discrete brackets. They get screwed to the wall or the ceiling, and then that assembly gets clipped into it. So it clips into this back rail that holds it into place. Again, if it's regular roll, this is reverse roll. You see the fabric is falling off the front of the tube. My drive is over here. That's where my button is to go into programming mode. So the fabric is falling off the front of the tube, which makes it reverse roll. And you can kind of see the cord in here a little bit. The cord of the tether that's coming out to power it up is located on the right-hand side. Reverse roll has the cable on the right. Regular roll has the cable on the left. So a kind of another way to think about it and really drive the point home: reverse roll, regular roll, right? Toilet paper, I'm a reverse roll guy, just so you know. All right, so this is an example of three shades, 3 triathlon battery powered shades with fabric wrap fascia on them that are discretely separate units. They have 3 separate pieces of fascia all the way across them too. So it's a little, the image is a little hard to see, but there's a piece of fascia here, a piece of fascia here, and a piece of fascia here. It's not one piece of fascia all the way across. They're butted up against each other. They have nice finished end caps that give you a good clean look between the two. So that's one example of that. It's just another shot of them going up at the same speed. I don't know how it comes out on your end, because yesterday when Catherine was doing her motion, it was a little jerky. On my end, it looks fine, but because of the internet connection. But the point here is that they move at the same speed regardless of being battery powered or not, right? I could have a battery powered shade and a tethered shade next to each other. They would move at the same speed. So it doesn't matter where it gets its power or how old the batteries are, they'll move at the same speed. So on the side, you got to be careful. You got to be aware of what the light gaps are going to be. If you're mounting it inside mount and it has fascia on it, the gap between the fabric and the jamb is going to be 11/16. If it doesn't have fascia, that gap is 9/16. Okay. We do take a deduction when you measure. You're going to measure the width. We're going to take an 1/8 inch off total, a 16th per side, and the system will be a little bit smaller than what you gave us for the reasons I explained earlier, so that we can guarantee that's going to fit. So the gaps are 9/16 or 11/16, depending on whether you have fascia or not. Corner mounts, triathlon shades aren't really a great candidate for corner mounts. And if it's your first job, you might want to get someone else with more experience doing it. And it may not be a job for triathlon, because when you put 2 triathlons into the corner, right? I have to look. I'm looking down from the top in the plan view, right, of this right here. So I'm looking at it from the perspective, but I'm looking down on the top of that. I have so much space between the backside. That 4.5 inches is the space from the back of the one shade to where the other shade starts on the other corner, around the corner. That's going to create a huge gap. The reason it has to be that far apart, because I need to be able to move that fascia, pull that fascia down to get to the batteries. So you get an excessively large gap in the corner with a triathlon battery operated shade, just because of the size of the headrail. So it's not a great candidate. We do have CAD drawings to show you how to do it, but it's not. It would be better with a roller 64 would be a better candidate for a corner than certainly this, but it's doable. So if you want to get into the real details of what all these systems look like, down to the the 16th of an inch, right? This shows you all the different configurations from a cross section. So if you need that for planning this out and want to know how all those things, what the size of them specifically are, you can go to the website and you can find all those CAD drawings of the different configurations of triathlons. So pockets aren't a recommended mounting style for it. Certainly if it has batteries in it, that's bad, because it's hard to get to the batteries if it's in a pocket, because you may not be able to move that fascia out of the way. Wireless performance is not going to be great, especially if it's a metallic pocket, because the RF receiver is integrated into the head rail, and now the head rail is up in a metal pocket, and RF and metal pockets aren't a good combination. And it really wasn't designed for a pocket mount. And again, your battery accessibility is potentially a problem. If you're willing to take the thing, if it's not a metallic pocket and you're willing to pull the thing down to replace the batteries and put it back up again, people have done that, but just be aware. It's not a great application for a pocket or a corner. So measuring, when I'm measuring for a roller shade, measuring across the top is probably all I need, because I've got a pretty good sized gap between the fabric and the jamb. So if there's a little variation there, it's unlikely that it's going to interfere. So measuring across the top is probably enough for a roller shade. When you're doing an insulating honeycomb shade, though, since you only have an 1/8 inch of gap between the jamb and where the fabric starts, I would measure 3 places and take my narrowest measurement and use that for my to place my order. That way I know I got clearance all the way, the whole height of the window. Measuring height for roller shades isn't that critical because there's fabric wrapped around the tube, and you set your limits. If your shade is too long, you can set your limit a little bit higher, and there'll be extra fabric wrapped around the tube, but no big deal. No one notices that. So height-wise on a roller shade, if you're over the height, it's no big deal. And on insulating honeycomb, I'd be a little bit more careful. Measure it pretty precisely and order that. That way you don't get a lot of stacking of fabric at the bottom, because that fabric doesn't wrap around a tube. The extra fabric shows up at the bottom. The extra fabric on a roller shade gets hidden on the tube. The extra fabric on an insulating honeycomb shade is visible at the bottom. As far as batteries go, I said about when you're putting batteries in, I would recommend testing the batteries every time before you put them in. It's a multimeter can do can test batteries, but it doesn't put a load on it. This is a specific battery tester that puts a load on the battery, and that's really the best way to get the true understanding of what the battery capacity is. Put a load on it. It tells you whether it gives you a range from 0 to or from 10 to 100%, and make sure that all of them have the same. All of them are at 100% before you put them in. If you get a battery that's at 80%, don't roll the dice. Don't use it. It's $1. It's not worth it. Put a battery in that's 100% so that they're all matched. Otherwise, that 80% battery will not only will drag the other batteries down to it. It's its own enemy, and it's the enemy of the other batteries as well. So get all 100% batteries in there, and you'll be fine. There are a couple of app notes referenced here that talk about battery life and strategies for battery life, but the most important thing is measure the batteries, make sure they're 100% before you put them in, and most of the other issues are small compared to that. So you have the option on some of the larger shades. When they get up over 38 inches, we can start to put more batteries in them. Typically it's 6 batteries or 8 batteries. But a shade that is 38 inches wide will take 6 batteries, but I can double the number of batteries in it. We call that battery boost. That gives you 12 batteries, right? So instead of 6 batteries, I can put 12 batteries in a shade that's over 48 inches. Instead of 8 batteries, I'll put 16 in. Obviously, you're doubling the number of batteries, doubling the cost of the batteries, but it reduces the amount of times you have to come out and replace the batteries. Right? It creates a trouble-free solution for the customer. If it's 6 years and the batteries die, no one's going to be upset about that. So I would always, when I can, I would always use battery boost. It costs about $100 more as an option, and then you have the additional cost of the batteries. But it just saves service calls. It doesn't, in reality though, it doesn't double the number of batteries. I mean, it just doesn't double the life. It doubles the number of batteries, it doesn't double the life. It's about 80% more, so it's 1.8 times. And the reason it doesn't double it is because when the batteries are sitting there for 6 years, I said alkaline batteries have a very slow self-discharge rate. Well, over 6 years, it becomes more of a factor. So over 6 years, the self-discharge becomes a little bit more obvious and it makes more of an impact. So you lose about 20% when you double it, but you're going from 3 years to 5.5 years. That's a pretty big win. So I would always double the batteries if I could, if that option's available. It always gets added to a wider shade anyway. And so this is an example in MyProjects. When you specify it, if you specify it with standard, with the standard amount of batteries, or you can specify it with battery boost. So this is a comparison of an 8x8 shade. It went from 3.5 years as an average up to 6.1 years by doubling the number of batteries. It doesn't double it, doesn't make it 7, but it makes a substantial difference. And that range, that's an average. The range is from the maximum range is from 5 to 7, depending on how many times you operate it. That can have an impact. But it's based on this size shade, so it has that factored in, but it doesn't know how many times you're going to operate it. It's based, that number average is based on 2 times a day. So 2 cycles a day, up once, down, up twice, down twice in a day. And that's typically not what people do anyway. They operate at much less than 2 times a day, typically. So, so you should have no problem getting to that average. So that's just a kind of couple of pieces of advice on batteries. Double it if you can. Always use new batteries. Always use alkaline batteries for D-cell and either Rayovac or Duracell. So what I want to do now is I'll kind of open up, see how, now you have kind of a lay of the land, and see what, take a look at my projects. So let me pull that in. Can you see that? I assume that, if, can you see it? Can you see the My Projects screen? Anybody?
Yes, we can see it, Joel.
Okay, good. I moved it from one monitor to another, and I wasn't sure if it made it over there. Okay. All right. So so My Projects, I have a whole bunch of things in here. This My Projects has everything, every product in it. We're going to just talk about triathlon. So I'm going to add a project to it, right? So I'm going to create a project, and I'm going to call it, I use my name and the date. That way I know what it is and who did it. And so for 22/20. Okay. So that's my name of my project. Okay. Put my name in. And I'll show you how to manage some of the projects a little bit later if we get a chance, but I want to show you how to manage a project. So when I come over here, like I can immediately start adding stuff to it, right? So I have this menu over here that says shades, has controls, has dimmers, lighting fixtures, accessories, and equipment, and other products. Any Lutron product can be ordered from here. We're going to really focus on the shade portion of this, and specifically on triathlon. But over here is an area tree, and what the area tree does, it gives you a great way to set up the job so that you can organize it well and name your shades so they make sense when they get to the job site, so that you can sort them out. Nothing's worse than naming shade, some random generic name, and then not knowing what it is when it gets to the job site, and then you have to figure out where that shade goes, right? You might have a cross reference. You might have a window schedule, and it might be window A, window B, window C. That's fine. You could do that in here, but just make sure you have that cross reference so you know where those windows go. So you have these areas in here. So I can create a new area, right? I'll create a new area, right? Add a new area. New area 1, not a great name, right? New area 2, new area 3. So I'm going to create this. I'm going to say, we're going to call this first floor. Okay, first floor. And we're going to call this second floor. Okay. And I'll just leave that one go for now. I'll get rid of him. So I got over aggressive with adding this. So I go here, click on the pencil and say delete area. Delete. Okay. So I have first floor and second floor. Well, I can do better than that. So let's go to first floor and say, well, in the first floor, we have a kitchen, right? So the first floor, there's this terminology of parent and child. The first floor is the parent. The kitchen's going to be the child, right? So it lives underneath the heading of first floor. So I'm going to create a child area. It has nothing to do with any children that live in the house. It is an area that is part of the first floor. It's a child of the first floor. So add a child area, and we'll call that kitchen. Okay. And I might have another one in here in the first floor. I'm going to go and add a child area again and call it family room. Okay, family room. So I have kitchen and family room, and maybe on the second floor, I'm going to have add a child area. I'm going to call it master. I'm going to call it master bedroom suite, because in the master bedroom suite, I'm going to actually have a master bedroom. I'm going to have a master bath, and I'm going to have sitting room. Okay. Okay. So if I go up here and I go to kitchen, you notice that my menu pops down over here. If I go to family room, my menu pops down over here. I go to first floor, nothing pops down, because first floor has sub areas or children, right? Kitchen, family room. Now, just as I explained to you what children were, that they were a subset of first floor, when I click on this, it says I cannot add anything to his. It says select the leaf area. So over here, we use the term leaf area. Over here, we use the term child. A leaf and a child are the same thing. It's a point of confusion sometimes. So a leaf area, think about it, a leaf is to a tree as a child is to a parent, right? So there's a little bit of kind of inconsistent terminology in there, but that's why I pointed out. So I can't add anything to a parent area, right? I have to choose a child or a leaf area. So if I go to kitchen, okay, there my menu comes again. Now I can add stuff to this, right? So I go to roller, all right? So let me see if I want to show you anything here yet. I'll show you that later. So kitchen. It doesn't pop up, you just hit add product, it'll pop up, right? So normally it pops up when you click on it, but if you dwell there too long, it disappears. You click on add product, it will show back up again, right? Make it disappear, make it come back. So I'm gonna go to roller, right? And I wanna create a roller shade. So up here's the name of it. Roller shade 1 isn't very descriptive. It's gonna be very difficult to figure out what that is when you get the product and the box says roller shade 1. So I'm going to call it east window. And if you want to do a belt and suspenders on it, you could say kitchen east window, but the area tree will replicate on the label. But east window, we'll call it east window. And then the width is going to be, we'll call it 52 inches by 60. Okay. So my mount style is inside, outside, or TBD. If I don't know what it's gonna be, and I know a lot of you guys are quoting and not actually placing the order. So TBD maybe is a good signal to say, hey, these dimensions I put in here are 52 by 60. It doesn't matter when you go to measure for pricing it out. You want to give a customer a price on the spot. You go quick whip out the tape and measure it. You have to be within, if you're within an inch, you'll get a good price, right? It'll be close enough. But what you might do is maybe you select it as TBD. That will be your sign. TBD here is, hey, I know it's going to be inside mount, but I don't know these dimensions yet. If I have a TBD and I can't order it, so that would be a way to lock it so it doesn't get ordered inadvertently without filling this in. You wouldn't be able to order it with a TBD. It would have to get resolved. So I could put TBD in there, and I know I have to go back and change the dimensions. So anyway, but we're going to do this completely. So we'll do inside mount. So inside mount, outside mount, right? I enter the fabric, and so if I know anything about the name of the fabric, if I know it's basket weave 90 is one of our fabrics, and I say, okay, basket weave 90. Well, if I type in 90, boom, it has 90 in the string. So I say, okay, I want basket weave 90. I want a 5% openness factor, and I want a charcoal. Okay, there it is. If I say what top treatment do I want? Do I want pocket, fascia with top back cover, right? Well, so there's things are a little bit out of order. So let's say we know we want fascia, right? So we want fascia, and then we're going to say, if it says pick automatically, if it says pick automatically, I would leave it, because when I pick the technology down here, triathlon, it will then start filling out some of that stuff automatically as I go down through here. So let that pick automatically. Make sure you go back and verify that's what you want. But it's so if I pick triathlon, select standard or wider, hit standard. Boom, the top treatment comes up as fabric wrapped, and it's either fabric wrapped or architectural fascia. So I can go back there and say, okay, it's going to default to fabric wrap, but I want architectural fascia, so I put architectural fascia there instead. So it's Savoy QS Triathlon standard operator, not wider, and the power source I want to use is either battery powered or wired, or as I refer to it, tethered. I want battery powered. Do I want battery boost? Yes, we want battery boost. Okay, so we're going to put battery boost in there. So if I say no, I don't know if you can see this. Right there, it says 3.1 to 4.7 years. If I pick yes, it goes from 5 to 5.5 to 7.5. Okay, so my battery life is, you can see it right in real time, what's going to happen. So I choose battery boost. Then under these additional options down here, there are a bunch of options that are defaulted. So they're hidden, but you want to look at them to make sure that they do what they are. They're selected as you wanted them. So the bottom bar, the designer bottom bar is the default. It's the lowest cost option, right? That's the one that gets defaulted to. But there are other bottom bar options, and you can click on these little information buttons here, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a description of what the bottom bars look like. So that designer bottom bar, and then the top back cover can be is the standard is white, but you can get it in any of these colors. There's a little bit of a custom charge for that, but you can get them in those custom colors. But generally, it's mostly white. A lot of people will paint them themselves if they want a custom color of their own that matches what they're trying to fit it into. But generally, you don't see it. It's not very visible. It lives on the back of the window, so it's visible from the outside maybe, but not from the inside generally. Fabric. If the fabric width is not wide enough to do the shade, so our shade up here is 52 inches wide. If the fabric roll width that we hold in inventory is greater than 52, it's always greater than 52. If my shade width that I'm specifying is wider than the actual fabric width, it will have to turn the fabric sideways so I can get more width out of that fabric. That's what railroading is. So if we leave it on as pick automatically, if it needs to be railroaded, it will. If it doesn't, it won't. The dangerous thing is if one shade gets railroaded in the same space, you want to railroad all of them because fabric looks a little bit different if it's railroaded or not. Custom seams, generally you're going to leave that off. No, you're not going to run into that very often. Lineal color, the lineal color of the we chose architectural fascia, which is metal, so that's a lineal. That's what those colors are describing. That's the color of the fascia. So we'll make it white, and the light gaps are 5/8 of an inch. Right, I can customize those light. Let me see if I can. Yeah, so I can customize the light gap. So if I want the fabric to go all the way to the end of the tube, I can do that. Generally, people don't do that. They leave it on as minimum. So I have a 5/8 inch light gap. My fabric ends 5/8 inch from the edge of the width of my overall system. So I get a 5/8 inch light gap. And the bracket type is generally it's bracket to bracket. You very rarely will do fabric width. Sometimes on an outside mount, you might do fabric width, but generally you're going to specify things bracket to bracket dimensions. Okay, and that tells you what your roll diameter is going to be, and it tells you how many batteries you need. Right. So done. Right. And then I can go and specify another shade and specify another insulating honeycomb shade. But then I can, but if when I have everything in here, and maybe I want to add, maybe I need to control this thing, and I'm going to put some controls in here, and I want to put a Pico in there that is controlling the shade, and I want it to be a shade Pico, right, with shade icons on it. Done, right? My Pico's in there. So I specify all the rooms and all the shades and all the rooms, and I get all, and I don't have to have exact sizes for quoting purposes. And then I can do a spec check. A spec check says it didn't find any issues. Rarely going to find an issue if I have if I have only one shade in there, right? Because if I have a shade that used different fabric, or I have a shade that was railroaded and one that wasn't, it would tell me, it would throw a flag here and say, hey, you should consider fixing this, or do you want to fix this? It will show you some things that you might want to look at. There's nothing in here at this point because of what I did, or how minimal amount of things I have in here. So if I go to quotes and orders, and I want to add a quote, and quote one. So when I do a quote, it's going to quote what I just specified. It's going to name it quote one. I can name it whatever I want. I'll leave it as quote one. It's going to quote on rev 0. There is only one rev here. It's rev 0, and it's going to quote every product that I had in every room because they're all selected. But if I want to separate the rooms out and create quotes for the first floor, if I only wanted to create a quote for the first floor, I can create a quote for the first floor. If I want to create a quote for the second floor, I can create only a quote for the second floor, right? I'm going to do all areas and hit next. And then there's you can separate it even, you can dice it up a little bit more. Like, do I want to just quote products? Do I want to quote just controls? So if I say, okay, I don't want to quote the Pico, I just want to quote the shades. Or if I want to do a crazy quote that's not worth very much, I want to quote just the Pico, right? I can do that. So I'm going to do all of them. I'm going to create the quote. So it's going to quote the Pico and the shade in this case. It's going to go churn through that and give you a price. This is going to give me list price. Let's see, this tool that I'm showing, the version that I'm using here only shows list price. So it's going to create a list price, and it's going to create a report. The other thing that we had while it's doing that, I'll show this. There's a proposal. There's not much you can do on a quote in terms of, other than picking rooms or picking what you want to quote. You can't make any changes to it. You can't mark it up. Whereas a proposal, you can mark up. Now, the difference between a quote and a proposal, this quote I created is a binding agreement that we will hold this price through July 21st of this year. So May, June, July, 3 months. You have 3 months, this price will hold. So we're going to guarantee you that you quoted that. And this is list price. Depending on what your pricing is, you'll get you'll have some fraction of list price that you'll pay. But that's the list price for the configuration that we have in there now. But if I want to do a proposal, right? It's the same. It looks the same in the beginning, but before I do that, before I finalize it, I have a couple options. By default, dimensions are turned off. They're turned off so that if I provide this to a customer, they don't see all the dimensions that I took, and someone can shop that quote around. They don't have the information necessary to quote it. So I leave the dimensions off if you're going to hand it to the customer. But if you want to show the dimensions, just beware that those are there, that someone could shop it. And I can do it. I can quote it as lot price rather than seeing a detailed price of everything. I can show it as lot price. It'll show me all the prices rolled up without discrete pricing. If I want to put a multiplier on it, I want to mark it up, I can mark it up. I can put a 25% markup on it if I want to do that, right? And create the proposal. And I can add a line in there for labor and put that number in there too, and then create the proposal. So I create a proposal, it'll do a very similar thing. So let's look back at this quote, and this is what the quote looks like that I just created prior to this. It has my list price on it, plus my shipping and handling, and the discrete prices for each of the 2 items that I have on there. If it's a lot pricing, it wouldn't show any pricing here. It would just show my list price total at the So if I go back to the projects, or go back here and open this guy up again. So I'm back to this project. Now you notice, because I created a quote, these are locked. I can't change these anymore. Since that's a binding contract, you can't go in there and now change things, because that would destroy the integrity of the quote. So, but if I wanted to create another quote now, I say, okay, let's take, I like this, but I wanted to change this dimension, or I wanted to do something here. So I just I want to make a new quote. I'm going to duplicate Rev 0. I'm going to duplicate it. And now it's Rev 1. Rev 0 is still there, but it's locked. Rev 1 is exactly the same as Rev 0 is right now, until I change something. So now I can change that and then create another quote from Rev 1. Right? So I can manage it that way. I don't have to go create another project or anything like that. The other thing I can do is, if I go to Rev 0, back to the original one I created, and I want to export it. I want to bring it into some other file. I want to bring it into some other document, and I want a spreadsheet of it. So it creates a spreadsheet basically of this order. Very simple. So I'll bring this. So it creates a spreadsheet with my stuff in it. So you can use this. This goes two ways. I could create this spreadsheet from my quote, or if I want to just start adding stuff in here, and it would be best if you're gonna use this to import in, create one that has some information on it already, and then you can get the context of how you have to add material into it. So I could change things here. If I wanted to change this width to 50 inches, right? I could change that to 50 inches, or I had a whole bunch of widths that I wanted to change. If I did my rough measurements and I knew I had to change them, rather than going into MyProjects to change them, I could export the spreadsheet, change all my dimensions here, save it, and then I'll move it out of the way, save it, and then come over here and then start a blank revision, or drag that file into this here, or click on this and pull that file in from where it's located, and that will bring it in. It will create a new quote here. So if I did that, it would create a quote called Rev 2, which would have the same thing as Rev 0, with maybe the specific dimensions on it that I want to actually order. So if I create a budgetary quote, export it, change all the dimensions in the spreadsheet, re-import it, now all my dimensions are changed, rather than going into 50 shades and changing all the dimensions on all those shades by clicking through this menu. So it gives you a way to do things much more rapidly, so that you can save some time with that function. So let me see if there's anything else. Anything else, James, that you want that I should touch on because that's kind of everything I wanted to talk about, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, the MyLutron piece was really good. I mean, Jacob, you're on here, Jacob? I know you kind of know a lot more about what.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to cover, going over the triathlon and then how to properly build a project and then quote it as well.
Right.
Anybody has any questions? Type in the chat log and.
Yeah, I didn't really see.
Going over.
Yeah, so that someone made a comment about great for working on jobs that don't have internet access. And you think internet access is everywhere? It's not always. So if I make up a dummy order or whatever, a dummy quote, and then export it so I have some context in the Excel file, then I can go in to the job and take my Excel spreadsheet and just take a bunch of dimensions, and then I can get most of the quote done without having an internet connection. And then when I have an internet connection, I'll bring MyProjects up, import it, and then I'll have that quote created. So it gets you around that situation where you don't have an internet connection. You want to take things down in a different format. But I would create a model. I would create a quote that has some stuff in it, export it so you have the context before you just, because it has to be in there in a very specific format.
Yeah,
So
no, Joel. I mean, that's all. I think that was a great little, webinar you got. I appreciate it.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. So someone asked a question about where the recordings are, and James, you're going to put them on
Oh yeah,
on your site.
Yeah. So Bell McCoy has a Bell McCoy University. So we're putting all of our webinars that we've been hosting. They basically have links to these videos. So I just put the link into the chat. You guys want to check that out? It would be under the Lutron recorded content. There's upcoming webinars. You can see those. And then under the recorded content, they'll have all the different manufacturers and Lutron's in there. And just click on Lutron. And we've actually got 3. This is our 4th shade specific webinar we've hosted and we'll be posting. So we'll have 4 really good shade webinars. If you guys want to learn more about Lutron shades and how to sell them and get really good at it, all those in the same page basically. So and then we'll have more Lutron stuff up on there, as they've been doing more and more webinars after this thing, and then also links to the Lutron training site, so you guys will know what trainings are available. You guys can take, and it should be an easy site for you to go to just to get that information.
Yeah, there's that Learn from Home website we just posted posted over the last month, that all the webinars we've been doing during the outage. So there's more stuff there.
Yeah, what's the link on that one that doesn't?
It's just called, it's lutron.com/learn from home. Lutron.com learn from home. Lutron.com/ Lutron home. Yep, that's it. Right there you go. That's right.
Oh, there's a lot of content on there as well.
Yep.
And then so yeah, you guys have plenty of opportunities to learn more and more about how to sell this stuff and get more money.
Yeah. And the good thing is a lot of that stuff's new. So, over the course of this last, several weeks, we've been curating the content for this delivery. So we've been, doing some tuning of it up, so it's as current as possible. So there's a lot of good new stuff. So if no one has anything else, I thank you for hanging out and look forward to working with you again sometime in the near future.
Yeah, thanks, Joel.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it, guys.
All right. See ya.
See ya.
All right. Bye.